I'm Melissa Shanahan, and this is the Velocity Work Podcast, episode number 1. Here we go. This podcast is for attorneys who are running their own firms. We explore tactics, tools, and stories related to pushing past simply lawyering well and into building a successful firm. Working in your firm and working on your business are two very different things. This podcast focuses on the latter. Well, hello there. Welcome to the Velocity Work Podcast, episode number 1. What? Episode number 1. It's finally here, finally launched out to you, and I'm so excited to bring you this show, bring you content and concepts in this way. You know, I love podcasts. So many people do, I know these days, but I'm obsessed with a handful of them, and I really like many more I have on hand for moments that it makes sense to listen to a podcast and to consume information. And just what a convenient way to consume information these days. So I'm really excited to bring this to you. There's a little nerves, right? Like I can hear my heartbeat in my headphones, which is, you know, normal when you're doing something new to have the jitters just a little bit. But more than anything, I'm filled with joy and excitement to be able to bring this show to you. I wanted to take an opportunity to really thank you before anything else, because I do know it is not lost on me that there are so many other things you can be doing with your time, and there are so many other podcasts you can listen to, and you're here. And I really appreciate that. And I hope that you can feel my gratitude from way deep down in me to your ears and from there to your work and your life. This podcast means a lot to me, and there's a lot of planning and involved and thought work involved in this. And it's such a gift to be able to bring it to you and to have you listen. I just really, really appreciate it, and thank you. On this episode, I figured the first episode, I'm going to share a little bit about myself, which then I'm going to share first, before I dig into me, I'm going to share this concept that is so contradictory to having me share about me. So I'm going to bring that to you and see if any of you can resonate, or if this is something that you maybe already abide by in your business and in your work. And then at the end, I'm going to share a little bit about why this podcast, what to expect from this podcast in various facets, and how it came to be. I think you guys will find that interesting, why we decided to go ahead and push forward with doing this. And then we're going to end on a specific concept that is a thread through everything that I work on with clients. I think it's just an important foundational, fundamental piece of information that if you don't like it, you might not like the rest of the episodes. So beware. But if that thread resonates at all, stick around, because this is the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about. So let's start with that concept I told you about that totally contradicts me sharing about me. Well, there is this personal branding agency out of Chicago called Simply Be Agency. They're pretty incredible. You should check them out. Jessica Zweig is the founder of that agency, and something she says often, she talks about that the secret to personal branding is that no one gives a shit about your brand, that no one gives a shit about you. And I love that. I love hearing her talk about that, because it really helps push my reset button for me and what I'm doing for clients and for students, is that we are human, and we are wired to walk around and be actually sort of subconsciously thinking, what's in it for me? Why am I listening to this? What's the benefit? How is this going to get me closer to where I want to go? And that's just, we're sort of innately selfish, and that's okay, but it is what it is. And so if we use our platforms to speak to an audience about ourselves, then we're missing the point. We're missing an opportunity to be able to speak to the client in a way that can benefit them, give them a nugget that they can take and run with, right? Like something that's really useful and adds to their life. Now, I totally believe in that. That is how I think about when I interact with clients. I think about that a lot. With this podcast, I'm going to be thinking about that a lot. However, I decided that it could be useful today to share a little bit about myself, my background, my story, how I got to where I am in my career today, what I care about, what I believe in deeply, and why I'm doing the work I'm doing, so that it helps provide context and meaning behind the words that I'm sharing. But please know that I wholeheartedly believe in leaving myself out of it and just sharing the lessons and sharing things that are going to be really helpful for you. But this first episode, I'm going to share a little so you understand my background and it gives you some context and you can get to know the person behind the microphone. Okay, well, where shall we begin? I was born in Danville, Indiana. I'm just kidding. I really did grow up in Danville, Indiana. But I went to Indiana University. My background is dental, which is pretty wild when you consider, 20 years later, what I'm doing now. My schooling was for dentistry. I was in the dental field. I was a hygienist for some time, but I knew even in school, like, this is not what I'm meant to be doing on this planet. I just knew it, but I didn't know what else to do. It's funny, you have to make those decisions at such a young age, what you want to go for, right? However, ended up in dental. Now, I'll tell you what, the one thing that's always been true about me is that no matter what I'm doing, I do it full out. Like, I don't half-ass things, if that makes sense. And I know probably a lot of you listening to this can relate. Like, there's just something in me that if I'm going to do it, I'm going to crush it. And I'm going to be the best at it that I can possibly be. And so that's what I ended up doing for a while in dental. I mean, talk about, I did things that hygienists can't even believe that I did in terms of, I set up a website for my patients, an educational site. I set up, for patients with periodontal disease. I maximized and fully utilized myself as a hygienist and for my patients, right? To serve my patients as fully as I possibly could. Not just your run-of-the-mill, come in, get your teeth cleaned, see you in 6 months. Nope, no way. I was totally invested in my patients. I educated them out the wazoo. And because of that, I had a really strong following of patients. But the truth is, I didn't want to be doing that for the rest of my life, and I knew that. So eventually, I became a certified life coach. That is a story in and of itself, how I kind of got into that program. But I deliberately chose a very specific program that seemed the most credible to me. And, life coaching industry is not something that's regulated. And so, but it seemed like the one where there were people coming out of there and they were killing it. They were doing a very good job, making a great living for themselves, and really somewhat people you wanted to be around. Their energy was great. The things they were teaching were life-changing. And so that's the program I picked for very specific reasons. Went through the program, got my life coaching certification. That was in 2008. So that was over 11 years ago now. And the beautiful thing about that is I slid right into that with like guns a-blazing. I was ready to roll. I was good at it. I was good at helping people apply the tools. The problem was I wasn't sure who I wanted to work with. And so I was kind of all over the map. People were hiring me to help them find their purpose and, whatever, all these different scenarios. And I didn't have a niche. And as many of you out there can relate or have learned, maybe the hard way, if you don't have a niche, it's very difficult to get ahead in whatever it is that you're doing. So that business that I had set up for myself in terms of a coach was doing okay, but it wasn't doing great. I couldn't support myself. At one point I was living in San Francisco, which last I heard, it did beat New York City in terms of cost of living. It was insanely expensive there. So I kept doing dental and I kept coaching on the side. I started working with startup founders in San Francisco, and that was quite eye-opening and really enjoyable. I really loved that work about, focused on productivity and helping them be as productive and creative and on as often as they needed to be, which it takes a ton of time and energy, and they have to stay hyper-focused, right? And so really the work was around that. that was a really incredible experience. But still, I wasn't making enough to be able to just totally leave dental. I was searching hard. I knew there was something out there that blended these worlds so well. And I ended up getting a job, which changed the trajectory of my life for sure, with a dental consulting company. Actually, it's dental medical. Any medical doctor or dentist who set up their own shop, had a private practice, they could work with us. They could hire us. This firm that I worked for was big, and they had, different arms of the company that provided different support for the clients. I was in sort of this training and facilitation arm of the company where I would travel full time to client offices all over the country and outside of the country as well, but mostly inside the United States, and provide these day-long facilitation retreats for different topics. But my favorite that I was trained on and did the most of was these strategic business planning retreats. Those were a game changer for me. They lit me up. It used my coaching background to really help these businesses set up a really good foundation for themselves. So, I was getting further and further and further away from dental because that was not anything to do with my focus in these meetings and everything around strategic planning. And it was changing the game for clients. And what I noticed was, clients paid us for a lot of different things. There were different membership levels that they could pay to be in and all that. But the clients that paid for this added service of having these annual business planning retreats and the quarterly retreats to support that annual plan that was put in place, they always grew faster and with less friction than the clients who did not pay for those retreats. And I was fascinated by this because there were some really great clients that were, paying a lot of money to the company I worked for and were making really good results, but they were not growing as fast as they wanted to, and they were having a harder time staying on point, towards what they were working on. And so I was totally fascinated by this. My husband and I are really close. We talk a lot about business. He's a startup founder, has been a couple times in the past, and has his hands in starting new things and new projects pretty often. So he's on the ground level of companies pretty often, and we talk about business quite a bit. And, as I'm talking to him about this, and I'm saying, this is just things that I don't think that they do for themselves because they don't know how. They weren't taught in school. And he's like, well, yeah, for sure. But businesses that are run by people who do know that you should be doing this for yourself, they still don't do it. And I got really curious about that. So I sort of wanted to test this hypothesis. I went out into the world and I decided to interview different businesses, small businesses. So really when I say small business, anything under, I think the highest revenue of anyone I interviewed was $5 million in annual revenue. But essentially, these people were saying yeah, we know we should do that. It's kind of been in the works. We've thought about doing it, but we haven't. I mean, we're just so busy. We're busy growing, and it was just this. It was sort of this afterthought that no one was really focusing on and giving attention to. And if they did, I had seen what happens when you don't versus when you do, right? The businesses I had been facilitating, by the way, in the company I used to work for, ranged anywhere from as smallest was probably $300,000 in annual revenue per year, and the largest was $12 million. So really ran the gamut. I just couldn't believe when I went out into the real world and we're talking to other businesses that, they probably did learn that this was important at some point in time. And they went to school for business and they still weren't doing it. So it was okay, this is super interesting. So about a year and a half ago, I started Velocity Work, which looks a little bit different than what it looks like now, the Velocity Work that you know now. But when I started, I was just working with small business in general. There were challenges with that. There's challenges when you don't niche down, right? But I wasn't sure what to niche down to. I was getting away from medical dental, any of that. Like I was done with that world. I really just wanted to explore small business. And the first attorney that I worked with was Joey Vitale. Some of you know him. His company is Indie Law. And I was blown to bits by how wonderful it was to work with him and how much I really understood his business. It translated really well from the other, from my background. I could pick up on it really well and could help and ask them the right questions to be thinking about their own strategy in the right ways. And so that relationship was really, really sort of flipped my brain into like, this could be a thing. It could be attorneys that I work with just specifically. I didn't really decide to focus just on attorneys who owned their own firms until earlier this year in 2019. It was the beginning of the year, and I was at a business workshop learning things for Velocity Work. And the woman who was leading the workshop said, if you are sitting in this room and you have not picked a niche, you need to leave because I can't help you. I can't help you grow if you don't know exactly who you're talking to. And I've heard that. I can't even tell you how many times I've heard that in my life, but I have heard that over and over. And I finally just decided it's time to pick. And I loved working with Joey more than anyone else. And yes, because Joey is an awesome human, but I just saw an opportunity there and I knew there was a need there that could be filled. And so I just declared that this is it. I'm working with attorneys who own their own law firms, whether they are solo owners or whether they're partners. This is what we're doing. Since I picked that niche, everything in my business has changed. Everything has grown so much more quickly. And it's so exciting to see the application of everything I've learned in terms of strategic business planning and apply it to lawyers who are running and doing their own thing, right? Here's the other reason I want to start my own company. I saw from a really early on that as I'm facilitating these days, when I was doing it for the corporation I worked for, there was some holes. There were some things missing from what they needed, what the clients really needed. I mean, yes, 100%. They left with a solid plan, a strategic plan. There's zero question about that. That is the easy part of the work, right? For me, like that's what comes really naturally to me. They walk out of that room and they know exactly what needs to be done and what they need to focus on. The thing that was missing though was the accountability between the meetings. And not only just the accountability, I don't mean that like got to keep them in line. I just mean we are humans and humans need accountability. I think when you're trying to do big things, it just makes sense. I have it in place for myself. Clearly the clients I work with have it in place because I help provide that for them. Anyone who's doing anything great has some form of accountability in place. That was missing from the product that clients were using. The second thing that was missing was a deeper conversation about what it takes as an individual, what it takes in order to see the progress that you want to see. You can't keep operating the way you've always operated and expect that your plans are gonna come to fruition. There's a lot that has to change. It's not just about execution. Execution has to happen, but how you show up behind the execution and the decisions that you make on a daily basis and the discipline that you apply to your own world and your own life it will make or break the plan. And that was missing. That conversation was missing. So yeah, people grew faster. I told you, the clients who had signed on for these meetings specifically were growing faster. There's no question. They had a strategic plan, right? However, there were ways to improve it. And working for a bigger corporation, you don't just get to go in and edit the presentation, right? No one was hearing me and everybody's just gone cruising, right? Cruising straight forward. No one had the time or bandwidth. And there really wasn't a process in place inside of the company for improvements like that to be made. So that's why I was so curious to go out into the world and A, see if businesses are doing this for themselves, and B, I knew I could do it at a deeper level and in a more impactful way. So that's what I set out to do with Velocity Work. And I believe at my core that this work is deeply important for entrepreneurs. And in my corner of the world, that's attorneys who are entrepreneurs, for them to sort of enable all of their dreams to come to fruition. And that sounds really airy-fairy, but listen, if you're starting a business, there's reasons why you started it. There's a place you want to get with it. There's a dream that you have for what you're starting and why you're starting it. And that doesn't get to happen unless you really line yourself up with that longer term vision, with those dreams and those goals, and doing it in a really strategic way. It's like having 2 full-time jobs. If you are an attorney who's running your own firm, you are busy lawyering, and it's hard to find the time to step back and focus on the business instead of just working in your firm. Even if you had the time, even if you carved out the time, do you have the specialized knowledge to really knock it out of the park? Do you have accountability set into place? Do you have access to these constant reminders that are going to help you stay on track? All these things, this is what Velocity Work provides for clients. And I can go more into the actual product and specifically how we work with clients at a later date, but I wanted to give you some background on why I think this is so important. There's an easier way, and with support and accountability and someone to handle and lead you through the strategic planning part, because it isn't your expertise, right? Your expertise is being an awesome lawyer. And maybe even if you're good at being a business owner, doesn't necessarily mean that you're great at strategic planning and getting your team on board and making sure the culture is great and having productive meetings and, all these things that go into it. Tracking metrics in your business and knowing your numbers, knowing your data. Like, that's stuff that we help clients do because you don't really have time or the bandwidth or the specialized knowledge to be able to do it on your own. That's why I do what I do. That's how Velocity Work was born. That's my trajectory, my background. Some people don't think that, like when they hear me talk about I was in dental and then I became a life coach and then I worked for this consulting firm. The dental and the life coach part, they're like, I get this vibe sometimes where it's like, we don't really have to share that. That's not really relevant. It's totally relevant, right? It is the chain link of events that kind of got me to where I am today. You can't always see until you get to a certain point. When you look backwards, it's so much easier to make sense of the journey. And that's my journey. And it's gotten me to where I am. I'm really good at what I do. And I'm really passionate about helping lawyers specifically run their own business in a way that serves them and that grows at the rate that they want it to grow and gives back to them as the owner, not just sucks the life out of the owner and makes you feel like you're spinning in circles. That's my job, is to really help improve the growth rates, but there's so much more than just that, right? Satisfaction, less stress, more confidence, more capability to be able to build something. The other thing I want to share, now that I've shared about my background and about Velocity Work and why it exists today, is the podcast. Let's give you some information there. The podcast is an answer to a problem I noticed as I'm facilitating retreats. When I'm facilitating retreats, the longest one right now that we're running is 2 full days. And when I say full days, that's no joke. They are full days packed full of information and of strategic planning. You walk out of that room and you have, yes, a strategic plan, but there's all these things that we discussed that are important to carry forward with you that aren't necessarily on the wall as goals, but they're important things to focus on between now and our next meeting. And there's just a lot to think about and to hold yourself accountable for. And yes, I have check-ins once a month with my clients, and I love those check-ins, and they're really useful and they do help keep things on track. But think about, that's once a month. There is day to day. There are times where the clients wish that I could be a bug in their ear, right? And just say, hey, close your door, remove distractions, and focus on this and get it done. Knock it out. And like little things like that, where I could offer this support in a way where I just wish I could be there with them to remind them of the things that are important, to remind them to stay disciplined, to remind them to stay on track. I teach clients to build in relaxation and free time for their own lives and for their loved ones. So it's not about working all the time, but it's about when you're working, really show up and just crush it. And that takes discipline. Most of us are not nearly as productive as we need to be. Most of us are working on the wrong things, right? We aren't working on the business where our hours are spent working in the business. And so there's a lot of little adjustments and shifts that need to happen in order for this plan to work. And, as we're sitting in retreats, there was a retreat in June specifically that I was leading. And one of the partners said, he just had this worried look on his face. And I was like, what's up? What's going on? And he was like, I'm so afraid I'm going to fail at this. And he didn't mean, yes, the numbers, the goals they had set were lofty, but doable, right? It wasn't the numbers that scared him. It was what he knew he needed to do in order to see those numbers, in order for those numbers to happen. And he was afraid he was going to let himself down and maybe let his partner down or whatever, right? And so I was like, listen, the only way that you fail is if you just quit, if you just give up, right? This is not going to be a perfect path. You're going to go back into your real world, into your daily life. You know the shifts that you need to make. And there's going to be days that you don't do it the way you thought you would. It didn't look like what you wanted it to look like. And that's okay, because you have tomorrow and you have the next day and you have the next week, and you keep showing up and you keep tweaking things until you start to find your groove and you create a new way of operating, right? And it was, even though that brought him some relief, it was kind of like, yeah, but that's great to hear right now, but I'm going to need to hear that a lot. And so I just realized there is an opportunity that I have to create a podcast where I want for all of you listening, I want you to know this is for any of you, that if it helps and if it provides value, gosh, just that's incredible. And I couldn't imagine, it's just such a gift. So thank you for tuning in, like I mentioned early in the podcast. But this podcast was really born out of wanting to serve my clients, wanting to make sure that the things that we did cover in the retreats and in the meetings, that those concepts are somewhere that they can go back and listen to, that those concepts are dripped out to them weekly so that they can continue to hone their way of operating and their discipline and keep showing up more and more and more like the version of themselves that they're going to need to be in order to create the business that they want to create. That's the concept I want to leave with you guys with, that a lot of the work that we'll be doing, that I'll be sharing on this podcast is, no doubt, we will go into some of the nuts and bolts and the numbers. Everybody gets really excited about the numbers and the planning. That will happen. But I'll tell you what, I can give you all of that. But if you don't shift into being who you need to be in order to have the business that you want to have, it's never going to shift. Like, it doesn't matter what goals you set. A, it's going to be more frustrating of a journey to get there. And B, it's slippery. The results are slippery when you get there. It's almost like there's a capacity to have a business that is whatever you want it to be, right? If you have a $500,000 business right now and you want a $1.5 million business, you're looking down the road, right? Like a few years down the road, but you're looking at that. You can't be the same person you are right now and operate the same way and have a $1.5 million business. You're going to have to grow and shift and have new habits and be a good leader and default to systems and processes. And like, there's all these things that you're going to have to step into and keep growing into in order to be the kind of person that can have a $1.5 million practice, if that's the growth that you're trying to seek. Whatever your next level is, you aren't going to get there by keeping the same habits and same way of operating as you do right now. And that is where I think there's a big missing link for people, for attorneys specifically, and in the work that I'm seeing. And so this podcast is really going to be to support that shift. It's going to be to support that these concepts that you need to play around with, and you need to take what resonates and really try to work it into your life and in a way that works for you, right? There's no blanket answers for anyone, and I would never pretend that that's the case. But I'm gonna share concepts here that if you don't run with them, and if you don't find ways to work them into your life or to really grasp them, then you're selling yourself short. And so that's what I want this podcast to be, is a support for the client work that I'm doing. And I have a hunch it's really going to resonate with a larger audience than just my clients. But the reason this was born was to support my clients and to support their journey and to make sure that there is a consistent voice that's going to help drive them to where they want to go. On that note, this has been lovely. It's funny, when I'm not teaching a concept, I ramble more, I think. But when I have something specific to teach, they'll be more short and to the point. Thank you for tuning in. It is my pleasure to be here with you, and I'm so looking forward to the coming episodes and the coming weeks. This podcast will be dropping once a week. Right now, it looks like it's going to be every Tuesday. So please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. I would be so honored to be in your lineup. Have a wonderful week, everyone. See you soon. Thanks so much for listening to the Velocity Work Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you run your own law firm, you have to come see if the Velocity Work client experience is for you. Head over to hello.velocitywork.com to set up a free call. We can learn more about one another, answer any questions we may have for one another, and determine if the Velocity Work client experience is a right fit. I hope to connect with you soon. Show notes from this episode can be found at velocitywork.com/podcast.